The world, before the fall. Before empires fall, they are silent. Not silent because nothing happens, but silent because everyone believes everything is fine. Markets are open, armies stand ready, flags still fly. Collapse never starts with chaos. It starts with confidence. Rome had laws, Persia had systems, the Ottomans had destiny, the Mongols had momentum. Each empire believed its power was natural, permanent, unquestionable, and that belief was their first mistake. Rome eternal by design. Rome did not just rule land, it ruled imagination. To be Roman was not only a legal status, it was an identity. To be Roman was to believe that order was permanent, that chaos belonged to the past, and that the system surrounding you was the strongest system humanity had ever created. Roman citizens did not simply live under Rome, they lived inside Rome. From the moment a child could speak, they heard the same stories. Stories of legions that never retreated, stories of enemies that disappeared into history, stories of a city that survived kings, republics, and civil wars. Rome had survived everything. Rome would survive anything. This belief was not enforced with fear. It was absorbed naturally, through language, architecture, and daily life. The roads beneath their feet told the story. The aqueducts above their heads reinforced it. The law courts, the markets, the forums, all whispered the same message. Rome is eternal. And because Rome felt eternal, it stopped feeling fragile. Strength slowly turned into routine. The legions still marched. The banners still rose. The formations remained unchanged. Armies trained the same way. For decades, because those methods had always worked. Generals studied old victories not to challenge them, but to copy them. Innovation felt unnecessary. After all, Rome had already perfected war. But while Rome repeated itself, its enemies observed. They adapted. They learned Roman tactics. They studied Roman discipline. Rome did not notice. Victory became memory. Memory became tradition. Tradition became doctrine. And doctrine is dangerous when it replaces curiosity. Rome did not collapse because it was weak. It still had soldiers. It still had wealth. It still had territory. Rome collapsed because it believed its strength was permanent. Because it believed the world would always behave the way it always had. Because it believed change was something that happened to others. Rome did not fall when it lost power. It fell when it lost the need to change. The birth of Rome. From myth to survival, Rome did not begin as an empire. It did not begin with marble columns, golden eagles, or triumphal marches. It began with uncertainty. Long before Rome ruled the world, it was a fragile settlement, struggling to survive in a hostile land. According to legend, Rome was founded in 753 BC by Romulus, a child abandoned, raised by a wolf, chosen by fate to build an eternal city. It is a powerful story. And Rome needed it, because the reality was far less comforting. Early Rome was not protected by mountains. It had no wide rivers to shield it, no seas to separate it from enemies. It was exposed. The land around the Tiber River was contested, unstable, and dangerous. Powerful tribes surrounded the settlement. Every border was uncertain. Every year carried the possibility of destruction. Rome was born in a place where survival was never guaranteed, and because survival was never guaranteed, the early Romans learned discipline before they learned ambition. They understood something fundamental. If they failed to organize, they would disappear. Myth as a tool for survival. The myth of Romulus was not just a story, it was a weapon. A city born from a divine child is a city that believes it has the right to exist in a world where strength often came from ancestry and bloodlines, Rome invented legitimacy through narrative. The story said, "We are not just another tribe, we are chosen." This belief mattered. It unified people who had little else in common. It gave meaning to sacrifice. It turned survival into destiny. But belief alone was not enough. Rome still had to eat, to defend itself, to govern. And that required something far more difficult than myth. It required structure. A city without natural defenses. Most early civilizations grew behind protection. Mountains, rivers, deserts. Rome had none of these. What it had, instead, was pressure. Pressure to prepare, pressure to respond quickly, pressure to avoid internal conflict. Rome could not afford civil chaos. Disorder would have been fatal. So from its earliest days, Rome valued control. Not control through fear, but control through rules. Rules created predictability. Predictability created safety. This was not accidental. It was learned through necessity. Discipline. Before wealth, Rome was poor. It had no gold reserves, no vast farmlands, no inherited trade networks. What Rome had was people, and those people were organized. Every citizen mattered. Every action had consequence. Early Romans believed that survival depended on contribution. To belong to Rome meant to serve it. Military duty was expected. Civic duty was honored. Responsibility defined citizenship. This created a culture of obligation. Rome did not grow because it inspired freedom. It grew because it demanded participation. And participation created unity. Building institutions before symbols. Other societies built palaces first. Rome built institutions. Other societies glorified kings. Rome limited power. Leadership was not permanent. Authority was divided. No one was meant to rule forever. This was revolutionary. Early Romans feared tyranny more than weakness. They had seen what absolute rulers could do. They believed unchecked power destroyed societies from within. So they built systems designed to restrain ambition. Magistrates had terms. Decisions required consensus. Power always had limits. These limits slowed decision-making, but they prevented collapse. Rome chose stability over speed. Law is the foundation of identity. Rome did something rare in the ancient world. It made law central to identity. To be Roman was not just to share blood. It was to live under Roman law. Law created equality, at least in theory. It made expectations clear. It reduced internal conflict. When disputes arose, they were settled through structure, not chaos. This allowed Rome to absorb outsiders. Conquered people were not always destroyed. Many were integrated. Rome understood something critical. An enemy absorbed is an enemy neutralized. Citizenship became Rome's most powerful tool. Survival through adaptation. Rome did not expand because it was aggressive. It expanded because it was adaptable. When Rome lost battles, it did not collapse. It studied failure. It changed tactics, reorganized command, improved logistics. Defeat became instruction. This mindset separated Rome from its rivals. Many societies feared loss. Rome analyzed it. Failure was not shameful. It was educational. This attitude allowed Rome to grow stronger with every challenge. Community over individual glory. Early Rome did not celebrate individual heroes. It celebrated service. Honor came from contribution, not dominance. Reputation came from reliability, not spectacle. This reduced internal rivalry. Ambition existed, but it was constrained by expectation. The individual served the city. The city ensured survival. This balance created resilience. Why Rome survived. When others failed, many settlements existed around early Rome. Most disappeared. Rome survived because it learned faster. It learned that unity was protection, that law was power, that discipline mattered more than pride. Rome did not wait to become strong. It acted as if weakness was permanent, and that assumption kept it alive. The foundation of an empire. By the time Rome began to expand beyond survival, its systems were already hardened. Its institutions had been tested, its culture shaped by pressure, its people trained by uncertainty. Rome did not become an empire by accident. It was built slowly, painfully, deliberately. The empire came later. First came survival, and survival taught Rome everything it needed to rule the world. The Roman Republic, power through discipline. The Roman Republic was built on fear. Not fear of enemies, not fear of invasion, but fear of kings. Romans had lived under kings before, and they believed that absolute power was dangerous. They had seen how one man's ambition could destroy an entire society. They believed kings ruled for themselves, not for the people. So, when the monarchy ended, Romans made a promise to themselves. No one would ever rule alone again. No one would ever rule forever. Dividing power to control, ambition. Instead of trusting one ruler, the Romans divided authority. 2 consuls ruled together, not one. Each consul could block the other. Power was shared by design. The Senate advised and guided policy. It did not rule openly, but it shaped every major decision. Magistrates were temporary, their terms were short, their authority limited. This was not weakness, it was discipline. Rome believed power must be controlled, or it would consume the state. Every office had limits, every leader was replaceable. The system assumed one truth: people change when they gain power. So power must never be allowed to settle. Balance through tension. This system created balance, but it also created tension. So consuls competed, senators argued, assemblies debated endlessly. Decision-making was slow. Compromise was necessary. But Rome accepted this cost because stability mattered more than speed. The Republic believed internal conflict was safer than absolute authority. Better to argue in the Senate than obey a tyrant in silence. This tension became normal, and normal tension became strength. Discipline as a cultural value. The Roman Republic was not held together by emotion, it was held together by discipline. Citizens were expected to serve the state. Military service was not optional. Civic duty was honored. Roman culture valued restraint, self-control, duty over desire. Glory was respected, but discipline was admired more. A Roman leader was expected to obey the law even when he commanded armies. This idea was revolutionary. In most societies, military power overruled civil authority. In Rome, the opposite was true, at least in theory. The army served the Republic, not the other way around. Expansion without destruction. Rome did not expand like other powers. It did not simply destroy its enemies, it absorbed them. When Rome defeated a rival, it offered something unusual: inclusion. Former enemies were allowed to live, to trade, to integrate. Some were granted partial rights, others full citizenship over time. Rome understood something critical. An enemy erased creates resentment. An enemy absorbed becomes invested. Citizenship became Rome's most powerful weapon. It created loyalty where fear could not, alliances. Over conquest, Rome expanded through alliances as much as warfare. Treaties connected cities, shared defense, created cooperation. Rome did not rule everywhere directly. It built networks of obligation. Allies fought alongside Roman legions. They shared victories and responsibilities. This made Rome larger without overstretching. The Republic grew slowly but steadily. Every new alliance strengthened the system. Law is the ultimate authority. The Roman Republic was governed by law, not divine command, not royal blood. Law defined power. Even the most powerful men were supposed to submit to it. This created legitimacy. Citizens believed the system was fair, even when outcomes were harsh. Disputes were resolved through courts, not violence. Law reduced chaos, and chaos was Rome's greatest fear. Discipline holds the Republic together. As Rome expanded, its population grew, different cultures, different traditions, different beliefs. What held them together was not identity, it was discipline. Shared rules, shared obligations, shared expectations. Rome was not united by love, it was united by structure, and structure worked. For centuries, the Republic survived challenges that destroyed other states. Success changes everything, but success changes people. As Rome grew richer, ambition grew with it. Military victories created powerful generals. Wealth created political influence. Men began to desire more than service. They desired legacy, and legacy requires recognition. Competition intensified. Politics became personal. The system was still functioning, but pressure was building. Ambition tests the system. The Republic had been designed to control ambition, but ambition adapted. Generals became loyal to their armies, not the Senate. Wealth funded private influence. Political rivalry turned aggressive. The system still existed, but it was being tested. Could discipline survive success? Could shared power survive personal glory? These questions grew louder with every victory. The beginning of the end, Rome had built a system strong enough to survive weakness, but it had never tested that system against excess power. The Republic was disciplined, organized, structured, but it depended on restraint, and restraint is fragile when ambition is rewarded. The Roman Republic did not collapse suddenly. It cracked, slowly, under the weight of its own success, the rise of the empire. When power needed one voice. As Rome expanded, the Republic began to crack, not suddenly, not violently, but quietly. Rome now ruled vast territories, cities far from the capital, peoples who had never seen the Senate, armies stationed months, sometimes years, away from Rome itself. The Republic had been designed for a city-state, not for a world power. Too much land, too many armies, too many generals loyal, not to the state, but to themselves. A system under pressure. The Republican system depended on balance, balance between offices, balance between institutions, balance between ambition and restraint. But expansion changed everything. Generals spent years commanding legions in distant lands. They shared hardship with their soldiers. They paid them. They protected them. Loyalty shifted. Soldiers no longer fought for Rome as an idea. They fought for the men who led them. The Senate remained in Rome. Power moved outward. This imbalance was dangerous. Wealth, war, and personal armies' conquest brought wealth, gold, land, slaves, and wealth brought influence. Successful generals returned as heroes. They funded political careers, they controlled votes, they demanded recognition. The Republic had never faced this problem before. Power was no longer abstract, it was personal. The system was still functioning, but it was bending. Civil war becomes inevitable. Competition turned hostile. Political debates became accusations. Accusations became threats. Threats became violence. Rome entered an age of civil wars, not wars against enemies, but against itself. Each faction claimed to defend the Republic. Each believed the other was destroying it. The irony was brutal. The Republic was being destroyed by those trying to save it. Julius Caesar enters the stage, Julius Caesar was not born a dictator. He was ambitious, charismatic, intelligent, and deeply aware of how power worked. Caesar understood that loyalty mattered more than titles. His campaigns in Gaul made him rich. They made him famous, and they gave him something more dangerous, an army loyal to him personally. The Senate feared him, and fear leads to mistakes. Crossing the Rubicon. In 49 BC, Caesar faced a choice: disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, or defy the Senate. He chose defiance. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon River, he committed an unforgivable act. A Roman general was forbidden to bring troops into Italy. Crossing the Rubicon meant one thing: civil war. Caesar reportedly said, "The die is cast." And with that step, the Republic crossed a point of no return. The end of balance. Caesar's victory was swift. His enemies fled. Rome surrendered. He was named dictator, first temporarily, then for life. The Republic still existed on paper, but balance was gone. Caesar did not destroy Rome. He stabilized it. He reformed laws, paid debts, rewarded soldiers. The people supported him. But Rome feared one thing above all else: a king. The assassination. In 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated. The conspirators believed they were saving the Republic. They believed removing one man would restore balance. They were wrong. Caesar's death did not revive the Republic. It exposed its weakness. Power rushed into the vacuum. More civil wars followed. Enter Augustus. Out of the chaos emerged Octavian, later known as Augustus. He learned from Caesar's mistakes. Augustus did not declare himself king. He did not abolish the Senate. He kept the Republic's appearance. But power slowly concentrated around him. He controlled the army. He controlled the treasury. He controlled the provinces. Rome still voted, still debated, but decisions flowed from one center. The first emperor, Augustus, became Rome's first emperor. Without ever using the title, he called himself Princeps, first citizen. It was a performance. Behind it, power was absolute, and it worked. Peace and order return. After decades of chaos, Rome wanted stability. Augustus delivered it. Civil wars ended. Borders stabilized. Trade flourished. This period became known as Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For the first time in generations, Rome felt safe. Order returned. Confidence grew. The empire flourished. The Golden Age begins. Roads connected continents. Cities expanded. Culture thrived. Rome reached its Golden Age. Art, architecture, law, the empire worked. And many believed the Republic had failed. But the empire had succeeded. The price of one voice. But centralized power comes with a cost. Stability depends on the ruler. Competence becomes essential. A good emperor brings peace. A bad one brings disaster. The system no longer corrected itself. Power was efficient, but fragile. The Republic had feared kings. The empire depended on them. Rome at its peak, the illusion of eternity. At its height, Rome ruled millions of people across 3 continents, from the cold edges of Britain to the burning deserts of Africa, from the Atlantic coast to the borders of Persia. No empire before Rome had ever held so much land for so long. Roads connected the world, not symbolic roads, real roads, stone by stone. Merchants traveled safely. Messages crossed continents. Armies moved with precision. For the first time in history, the world felt connected. Trade flourished. Grain from Egypt fed the capital. Silver from Spain funded armies. Silk from the east passed through Roman hands. The empire did not just conquer, it managed. Law brought stability. Roman law defined contracts, property, citizenship. It reduced chaos. It made expectations clear. People knew where they stood. To live under Rome was to live under order, and Romans believed their system was perfect, not just effective, perfect. They called it Roma Eterna, eternal Rome. The idea was powerful. Rome did not see itself as a phase of history. It saw itself as history's final form. Empires before Rome were mistakes. Rome was the solution. This belief was everywhere. In architecture, in ceremony, in language. Monuments were built not to celebrate moments, but to announce permanence. Stone replaced wood. Marble replaced brick. Rome was not meant to age. It was meant to last, but permanence creates complacency, and complacency is invisible to those who benefit from it. The military that stopped adapting. The Roman army was once the most flexible force the world had ever seen. It adapted quickly. It learned from defeat. It improved constantly. But success changed that. Victories became routine. Routine became doctrine. Formations stayed the same. Equipment changed slowly. Command relied on tradition. Enemies studied Rome carefully. They copied Roman tactics. They learned Roman discipline. Rome still won, but with more effort. Small warnings appeared. They were ignored because Rome had always won. Politics without accountability. At its peak, Rome was rich, and wealth changes politics. Offices became prizes. Influence became currency. Corruption spread quietly, not through chaos, through comfort. The Senate still met, debates still happened, but decisions served individuals more than the system. Politics became distant from people. Citizens felt Rome's power, but not its care. Trust weakened. Leadership grows far away. As the empire expanded, leadership moved further from reality. Emperors ruled from palaces. Governors ruled provinces like personal kingdoms. Distance created ignorance. Problems at the edges of the empire took months to reach the center. By the time action came, damage was already done. Rome still looked strong. Armies stood, taxes flowed, cities shined, but strength was becoming a memory, not a practice. The illusion becomes dangerous. Rome believed it had solved history. That belief was fatal, because systems that believe they are perfect stop asking questions. They stop listening. They stop adapting. Rome still functioned, but it no longer evolved. The illusion of eternity replaced the discipline that built the empire. When victory changed Rome, Rome did not begin to fall when enemies reached its borders. That moment came much later. Rome began to fall when it stopped asking itself why it had survived so long in the first place. For centuries, Rome had faced danger, and for centuries, Rome had responded with discipline. Crisis had shaped the empire. Pressure had refined it, but success changed the relationship between Rome and reality, because success removes urgency, and urgency is what keeps systems alive. When survival turns into expectation. In its early centuries, Rome lived with fear. Fear of invasion, fear of rebellion, fear of collapse. That fear forced Rome to remain alert. Every generation believed survival had to be earned again. But as centuries passed, something subtle changed. Victory became familiar. Borders stabilized. Enemies retreated. Internal revolts were crushed quickly. Rome did not notice when survival stopped being a struggle and became an assumption. And assumptions are dangerous, because when survival is assumed, preparation feels unnecessary. The psychology of long success. Long success reshapes how societies think. At first, success builds confidence, then pride, then entitlement. Rome reached a point where defeat felt impossible, not unlikely, impossible. This belief did not come from propaganda alone. It came from lived experience. Rome had won again and again, generation after generation. Why would the future be different? This question was never asked seriously, because asking it felt almost offensive. From discipline to comfort, early Rome was disciplined because it had to be. Late Rome was disciplined because it remembered being disciplined. And memory is not the same as practice. Institutions continued. Rituals remained. Titles existed. But the emotional relationship to discipline changed. Duty felt heavier. Obedience felt optional. Sacrifice felt outdated. Rome did not abandon discipline openly. It quietly softened it. The dangerous calm. For long periods, nothing dramatic happened. No great invasions, no massive rebellions. Peace felt permanent, and peace created a dangerous calm, a calm in which problems grew slowly, unnoticed. Corruption did not explode, it accumulated. Inefficiency did not paralyze the state, it slowed it. Rome did not fall asleep, it relaxed. Success is a teacher, and a liar success teaches lessons. Some are true, others are lies. Rome learned that its systems worked. That was true. Rome also learned that its systems would always work. That was the lie. Because systems only work when the conditions that created them still exist. Rome never checked whether those conditions had changed. The expansion trap. The empire grew larger every decade. New provinces, new peoples, new responsibilities. But the systems managing them were designed for a smaller world. Rome added layers of administration without strengthening the foundation. More officials, more taxes, more complexity, but not more accountability. The system stretched, it did not break. Yet, distance changes. Everything. Rome ruled lands its leaders would never see. Decisions were made in marble halls about people living thousands of kilometers away. Distance created delay. Delay created misunderstanding. Misunderstanding created resentment. Local problems waited months for responses. By the time solutions arrived, they were often irrelevant. Rome still ruled, but it no longer understood what it ruled. The subtle rise of indifference. In earlier centuries, Roman leaders feared failure. Later leaders feared inconvenience. This shift mattered. Problems that once demanded urgent action were postponed. Reforms that once felt necessary felt risky. Why change what still appears to function? Indifference replaced vigilance, and indifference is silent. When tradition replaces adaptation, Rome loved tradition. Tradition legitimized authority. Tradition created identity. But tradition also froze behavior. Practices were repeated because they were ancient, not because they were effective. Innovation slowed. Questioning tradition became suspicious. Rome confused stability with stagnation, and stagnation always precedes decay, the illusion of control. From the center, everything looked manageable. Taxes were collected, armies were stationed, edicts were issued, but control was becoming symbolic. Orders traveled slowly, enforcement weakened, local officials acted independently. The empire was still connected, but loosely. Control existed more on paper than in practice. And the first cracks no one took seriously. Small signs appeared. Tax evasion increased. Local unrest became common. Officials ignored laws selectively. None of these were fatal alone. Together, they formed a pattern. But Rome did not look for patterns. It looked for crises. And because there was no single dramatic crisis, Rome believed nothing was wrong. Why no one panicked? There was no moment of alarm. No single year when everything changed. Life continued. Markets functioned. Festivals were held. Cities expanded. Collapse did not feel close. That was the problem. Comfort is the enemy of awareness. Rome had reached a level of comfort unprecedented in history. Comfort dulls perception. When basic needs are met, warnings feel abstract. The empire was still delivering order, so people assumed order would continue. Few noticed that the cost of maintaining it was quietly increasing. The shift no one recorded historians love dates, but Rome's decline does not begin with a date. It begins with a mindset that says we have solved history. Once a society believes that, it stops learning. Rome did not lose its strength in battle, it lost its curiosity. When exploitation became normal, corruption did not destroy Rome overnight. If it had, Rome might have reacted. Rome was very good at responding to emergencies. What it was not good at was responding to slow poison. Corruption did not arrive like an enemy. It arrived like a habit. When rules become negotiable. At first, Roman law was clear. Office was earned. Justice was expected. Responsibility followed power. But over time, something changed. Rules did not disappear. They became flexible. A law could be enforced or ignored. A judgment could be fair or adjusted. Not because the system collapsed, but because it allowed exceptions, and exceptions are dangerous because once one exception is accepted, the next feels justified. Selling power quietly. Roman offices were not officially for sale. That mattered, because it allowed everyone to pretend nothing had changed. But behind the scenes, money spoke clearly. A wealthy man could secure a position. A powerful family could influence appointments. The language was polite, the transactions invisible, but the result was clear. Power shifted from merit to access, and access belonged to the wealthy. Provinces, as personal assets nowhere, was corruption more visible than in the provinces. Governors were sent far from Rome, often with limited oversight. In theory, they represented the empire. In practice, many saw opportunity. A governorship became an investment. Officials paid to secure positions, then extracted wealth to recover the cost. Taxes increased. Local elites were pressured. Justice favored those who paid. Rome gained short-term revenue, but it lost long-term loyalty. Why? The center looked away. Rome knew corruption existed. This is important. The empire was not ignorant, but it tolerated corruption because it was convenient. Corrupt officials delivered taxes on time. They maintained order locally. They avoided costly rebellions. As long as stability remained, the center preferred silence. Rome traded integrity for efficiency. It believed control mattered more than fairness. This decision would haunt it, the normalization of injustice. For ordinary people, corruption changed daily life. Justice became uncertain, protection unreliable. People learned to adapt. They paid bribes, they sought patrons, they avoided official channels. The system still functioned, but not equally. Fairness was replaced by navigation. And when people navigate a system, instead of trusting it, the system has already failed. The psychological cost. The most damaging effect of corruption was not economic. It was psychological. People stopped believing Rome represented them. They saw the empire as something separate, something distant, something exploitative. Loyalty weakened. Why sacrifice for a system that treats you unfairly? This question spread quietly. Corruption feeds inequality. Wealth concentrated. Those with influence adapted easily. Those without fell behind. The gap widened, and inequality destabilizes societies long before violence appears. Rome was still rich, but prosperity was uneven. and uneven prosperity breeds resentment. When officials fear exposure more than failure. As corruption deepened, officials feared discovery, not failure. They covered mistakes, silenced critics, punished whistleblowers. This created a culture of fear. Truth became dangerous, and without truth, systems cannot correct themselves. Reforms that never go far enough. Some emperors tried to fight corruption. Laws were passed, punishments announced, but reforms were selective. They targeted rivals, not allies. They treated symptoms, not causes. The structure remained the same. Corruption adapted. It always does. The economy begins to strain to sustain the empire. The state demanded more, higher taxes, more labor, more resources. The burden fell on the lower classes. Farmers struggled to survive. Small traders disappeared. The economy still functioned, but it was brittle. One shock could break it. Currency and confidence. To meet expenses, the empire debased its currency. Coins contained less precious metal. At first, few noticed. Then, prices rose. Confidence in money declined. People hoarded goods, bartered, avoided long-term trade. An economy can survive inflation. It cannot survive loss of trust. The growing distance between Rome and its people. Rome still demanded loyalty, but it offered less in return. Protection felt inconsistent. Justice unreliable. Citizens no longer felt represented. They complied, but they did not believe. And belief is the glue of empires. Why no one rebelled immediately? This is crucial. Despite everything, Rome did not face instant collapse because corruption creates survival strategies. People adjust. They find ways around the system. They endure. This endurance creates the illusion of stability. But endurance is not loyalty. It is patience. And patience runs out. The system turns on itself. Corruption does not just harm citizens, it destroys institutions. Officials compete for resources. Bureaucracy becomes hostile. Energy is spent protecting position, not serving purpose. The state consumes itself. Rome was still functioning, but it was no longer healthy. When force replaced authority, Rome did not lose power all at once. It lost legitimacy. And when legitimacy disappears, power must be enforced. Force replaces consent. Fear replaces loyalty. This is the most dangerous phase of any empire because it still looks strong, but it is no longer stable. The throne becomes a target. In earlier centuries, the position of emperor was desirable. Later, it became dangerous. Ruling Rome no longer meant authority, it meant survival. Emperors did not ask how to govern, they asked how to stay alive. Assassination became common, conspiracies constant. An emperor could rule for years or for weeks, sometimes for days. Power became temporary, by violence, not by law. The end of predictability. Predictability is the foundation of order. Rome lost it. Each new emperor reversed policies, punished previous allies, rewarded new supporters. The state lurched from decision to decision. No long-term planning, no continuity. People stopped investing in the future. Why build if tomorrow everything might change? The army discovers its power. The Roman army had always been powerful. Now it realized it was decisive. Soldiers understood something clearly. Whoever controlled the army controlled the empire. Generals began proclaiming emperors, sometimes sincerely, sometimes opportunistically. Politics moved to the battlefield. The Senate watched helplessly. Loyalty is bought, not earned. Soldiers no longer fought for Rome. They fought for rewards, donatives, land, privileges. Emperors paid armies to secure loyalty. This created a vicious cycle. Each new ruler had to pay more than the last. The treasury drained. The army demanded more. Violence as a political tool. Fear became policy. Suspected rivals were eliminated, families destroyed, supporters purged. Rome ruled through intimidation. This silenced opposition, temporarily, but it also destroyed trust completely. No one felt safe. Not senators, not generals, not citizens. The collapse of civil authority. Civil institutions lost relevance. The Senate still existed. Courts still operated. But real power lay elsewhere. Decisions were made by men with swords. Law became decoration. Force decided outcomes. This shift was irreversible. Once law loses authority, it rarely recovers. Fragmentation of the empire. Different regions experienced different realities. Some provinces remained stable, others descended into chaos. Local commanders acted independently. Rome still claimed control, but coordination was weak. The empire began to fragment psychologically before it fragmented politically. The cost of constant crisis exhausts societies. People become numb. Violence feels normal. Instability expected. Citizens focus on survival, not participation. Public life shrinks. Culture stagnates. Rome grew tired. Why? No one could fix it. Some emperors tried reform, but reform requires trust, and trust was gone. Every reform looked like a power grab. Every decision seemed temporary. People waited for the next crisis. No one believed in permanence anymore. External pressure increases. While Rome fought itself, external enemies adapted. They faced weaker borders, slower responses, divided leadership. They did not need to defeat Rome. They only needed to push. Rome collapsed inwardly first, an empire held together by fear. Rome still ruled, but it ruled through fear. Fear is effective, but expensive. It requires constant enforcement. Rome could not sustain it indefinitely. When nothing was left to hold together, Rome did not collapse in flames. That image is comforting. It suggests drama, a clear ending. But Rome did not end that way. It faded. And fading is harder to see, and harder to stop. An empire that still existed. From the outside, Rome was still Rome. The emperor still ruled, the army still marched, taxes were still collected, laws were still written, titles were still granted, ceremonies were still performed. If you looked quickly, everything seemed intact, but the meaning behind these things had disappeared. Rome was still functioning. It was no longer believed in. When survival replaces purpose. Earlier Romans had lived for the state. Later, Romans lived under it. This distinction matters. People no longer asked, how do we strengthen Rome? They asked, how do we survive Rome? Public ambition vanished. Private survival took its place. The future stopped being a shared project. It became an individual concern. Institutions without soul, institutions still existed, but without conviction. Officials followed procedures without belief. Laws were enforced selectively, rules obeyed when convenient. Institutions became habits. Habits can continue long after meaning is gone. Rome was now a collection of habits. Why reform? No longer worked. Rome tried to reform. Some emperors were capable, some were sincere, but reform requires more than authority. It requires trust, and trust had been destroyed over generations. Every reform was suspected, every change feared. People waited for collapse instead of hoping for renewal. Cynicism replaced hope, the psychological exhaustion. The empire was tired, not physically, psychologically. Decades of crisis had drained resilience. People expected instability. They adapted to it. Adaptation kept them alive, but killed collective action. Rome was no longer a society, it was a population. Borders that no one felt responsible for defense still existed, but responsibility did not. Local commanders guarded local interests, central authority felt abstract. When borders weakened, responses were slow. Not because Rome was weak, but because no one felt ownership. Ownership is emotional, and emotion was gone. The meaningless center Rome itself. The city was no longer the heart of the empire. Decisions were made elsewhere. Power moved constantly. The center existed in name only. An empire without a center cannot coordinate. It can only react. The collapse stops being scary. The most dangerous moment is not panic. It is acceptance. Romans began to accept decline, not openly, not consciously, but emotionally. They lowered expectations. They adjusted ambitions. Collapse became normal. And normal collapse does not trigger resistance. The illusion of continuity. Rome continued to issue decrees, to mint coins, to appoint officials. History looked uninterrupted. But continuity was an illusion. Each generation inherited less coherence than the one before. Rome was shrinking inward. Why the end was quiet. When external invasions accelerated, they did not shock Rome. They confirmed what people already felt. The system could no longer protect them. Belief had died earlier. The fall was administrative, not emotional. The last thing to die. Rome lost armies, lost territory, lost power. But the last thing to die was identity. People still called themselves Roman long after Rome no longer existed. This tells us something important. Rome did not fail as an idea. It failed as a system. What Rome leaves behind? Rome built roads, laws, institutions, but its greatest legacy is its warning. No system collapses because it is attacked. It collapses when people stop believing it belongs to them. The final reflection. Rome did not fall in a single moment. It declined from within, step by step, habit by habit, compromise by compromise, until one day there was nothing left to hold together. Not because Rome was defeated, but because it was empty. Why Rome never really disappeared. Rome did not collapse in a single moment. There was no final morning when people woke up and realized Rome was gone. No silence, no shock. Life continued. Markets opened. Farmers worked. Children were born. For most people, Rome did not end. It simply stopped arriving. When central authority disappeared, life did not disappear with it. Power left. Life remained. Cities governed themselves. Local leaders emerged. Communities adapted. Rome's absence was gradual, and that made it survivable. History later called this period the Dark Ages. But darkness is relative. What disappeared was not humanity, it was coordination. Trade slowed, information traveled less, administration fragmented, people did not vanish. They adjusted, they always do. Rome did not lose its people, it did not lose its culture overnight. What died was centralized trust, the belief that a distant system could fairly organize millions of lives. That belief never fully returned, and that matters. Rome's armies vanished, its ideas did not. A law survived, citizenship survived, administration survived, even language survived. Rome stopped ruling, but it continued teaching. European states borrowed Roman law, governments copied Roman administration, empires studied Roman mistakes. Rome became a reference point, not a memory, a lesson. Modern states are larger than Rome, more complex, more connected, more fragile. And just like Rome, they depend on belief. Belief in institutions, belief in fairness, belief in purpose. When belief weakens, systems strain. Rome is not important because it was ancient. Rome is important because it was first. The first to manage scale. The first to collapse under it. Collapse is not dramatic. It is procedural, administrative, psychological. Systems do not explode. They thin out. Meaning drains before power does. Rome's story feels familiar because it is human. Comfort replaces vigilance. Power replaces responsibility. Survival replaces purpose. These are not Roman traits. They are universal. Rome simply showed us where they lead. Rome did not fall because it became evil. It fell because decay became normal. Normal corruption, normal inequality, normal indifference. Nothing destroys a system faster than normalizing its own decline. Rome does not warn us with fire. It warns us with silence, with institutions still standing but meaning gone, with systems still running but belief absent. By the time collapse feels real, it is already complete. Rome did not disappear. It transformed into a mirror that shows us what happens when a system forgets who it exists for. Rome did not fall so history could move on. It fell so history could remember.